Well, my all-star attorney panel is here with me as well. We've got Monique Pressley, who has represented in the past Bill Cosby, constitutional attorney and white-collar defense lawyer Seth Berensweig, and Benjamin Chew, former co-lead counsel for Johnny Depp during his defamation trial against Amber Heard. Ben, I want to start with you because in our conversation even yesterday, we were trying to figure out how the cross was going to go. The optics, because she was so emotional. Even more so, frankly, in terms of the tears and the sobbing than even Cassie Ventura had been throughout the course of her testimony. Not comparing the traumas that they had both alleged, but it was notable just how emotional she was. And you thought that the defense had to handle her with care. Did they accomplish that?
No, I don't think so. I think with a witness like that, as we discussed last night, you have to be very careful. This is a likable witness, a credible witness, and you have to have a much lighter touch. To say abruptly, isn't it true you didn't have forcible sex with Diddy? How, of course, is she going to answer that? But of course it's true. I would never make this up. And as your reporter said, she had a very strong, firm response to that. I don't know what he gets out of that. And his other question, what if you're not the victim? Well, I am the victim. I don't think any of that would have played well before the jury.
What do you think? You're a defense attorney and have done a lot of work in this area. How would that approach have resonated with you? Would you have taken the approach of challenging her in that way? I mean, in a way, Diddy is fighting for his life and his attorneys have to perform for him as well. Would you have taken that tactic?
Right, and sometimes it's not even the tact you take, it's which lawyer you use for the tact that you take. And so I was more interested in the choices being made because, as you said, if they're going to go hard and they feel like they have to for whatever reason, maybe they've got facts we don't know about yet, and so they view the witness on the stand as being a fraud, being a liar, being someone who's pretending with all of these tears but really behaved a different way. Well, if you're going to show me that in this cross-examination, I need to see it early on, or you're running the risk of really alienating the jury. But then, unfortunately, we're still in a very sexist society and you don't know what jury you're dealing with. So if you have a woman who maybe could handle these hard questions in a softer way, maybe you use that strategy. But I didn't have an issue with the fact that they had to ask these hard questions because I think, frankly, that's their obligation. You can't soft pedal with a witness who, from their perspective, is on the stand crucifying their client and falsifying testimony before the jury. You've got to figure out a way to get somewhere in the middle of the road, and I think maybe it's with strategy instead of with the actual words on the page.
Really important point that he's got like 8 or 9 attorneys, by the way, several of whom are women, and I wondered about the tactic and when they've used which counsel. By the way, the prosecution also, all women. So the idea of how they have decided to divvy up the work is also really, they all have different styles and personalities, but to the point of what they have to prove on the prosecution, Seth, I mean, they had testimony that came in that Diddy was trying to blackmail her as well, either taking photos off her phone, putting them on his own phone, dangling this idea that she had sold some sort of a comedy series to ABC and then saying, I'll get rid of that unless you have Cassie call me back, all these things. Does that fit the kind of pattern that you need to establish that RICO charge?
In my view, it does, and I think the prosecution has done a very solid job so far. Now, make no mistake about it, there's still a long way to go in this case, and they have to continue to develop the evidentiary scaffolding. But I thought that they have done a tremendous job with the witnesses, and let's just continue to focus on Mia. One of the things that was interesting, you talk about a criminal business enterprise, which was one of the evidentiary requirements. They covered a lot of that with her, other witnesses as well, but they're covering members of the business enterprise who are essentially, participants in this whole element. And, you were talking about some of the underwhelming questions that counsel asked today in identifying the elements of the business conspiracy. Remember, this is a corporation. This is a historically rare theory that a business, extremely rare in recent modern American business history, has been used to facilitate basically him running an empire as a sex mobster. They talked about, for example, the HR department. And one of the questions that they asked Mia was, and this takes victim blaming to a whole new level. They said, well, did you report the sex freak offs to HR? And she said, no, of course I didn't, because they're just going to protect him. So I thought that was pretty underwhelming as well.
That's an important part, because that goes to the idea of the inner circle and the realm that they're trying to establish. But just playing devil's advocate, I mean, RICO cases are very hard to prove, and connecting those dots in real time to a juror who's watching and wondering, am I seeing a toxic, harmful, violent relationship? Am I seeing RICO? How can you bridge it? Of course, the closing will do a lot of that. But then there was this moment about her testimony where she said that she believed that he had reached out to her last year around the time that lawsuit came out from Cassie Ventura. D-Rock, the security guard's also been mentioned, that to kind of make sure she wasn't a threat. If you're the defense counsel, how do you guard against the idea of witness tampering?
I think that's very difficult, and those facts are really bad. And the fact that D-Rock was involved makes it seem much more like an enterprise. It's not Diddy himself making the call, it's one of his employees. So I think that's a damning fact.
He called as well, but you're right, D-Rock was a part of it and thinking it. But then again, when you're building a case for defense, you want to know who might be in your camp, right? You have to explore in some respects who does not have this vision of me. They have to build a case, right? A defense.
Yes, and also the fact that if you're like a close to billionaire person running 30 different businesses, you don't make every call about anything. You don't make most calls. So the obligation for the defense, if they choose to put on a case, will be to do some of what the assistant did, where the assistant was trying to explain, no, he wouldn't have known how many bottles of baby oil there were because he's running a global empire, and that's just not the things that they do. And I think maybe some people, typical jurors, might not have an understanding of how little of a person's life, like Mr. Combs, actually touches grass, as the kids would say, and how many things are actually done by other people, and to not import meaning into that isn't there. And I'm not saying it is or isn't there in this instance. Maybe D-Rock was the henchman who did all of the strengthening of situations for him and shoring it up and fixing it. But it could also be the case that this is just not a person who did a lot of anything on his own. Everything that happened was call this person, get this done, do that, while he focused on other things. So I think that will be their job to bring that kind of revelation to a jury.
A really important point, and just to remind people, we'll come back with more information. Cassie Ventura testified that D-Rock was and his wife were a couple that she went to when she needed to feel safe at times. So you have to bring that into how the defense will bring that into the conversation. As much as he was a part, she claims everything else. I'm curious to see how, when she comes back on the stand, Mia, on Monday, that sort of cooling off period where the jury has to remember key moments, how they'll play it. We have a lot more to talk about. Stand by. Well, you all sent in tons of questions about the case. So tonight it's time for America Asks, Diddy on Trial Edition. And for those of you who are at home who want to participate, you can go send us your questions by going to cnn.com/DiddyQuestions. My panel is back with me, and I'm glad they are. So let's see, Ben, this is for you. Our first question is from Ashlyn from South Carolina. Given the high-profile nature of this case and Diddy's celebrity status, what steps are being taken to ensure that jurors remain impartial and are not influenced by media coverage or public opinion?
That's a great question. Judge Subramanian has instructed the jurors not to discuss this with anybody else, including other jurors, until they begin deliberation, nor are they allowed to watch any social media or any show like this that has to bear on the trial.
Well, that seems unfair. Just the Laura coach, that's fine. Monique, a question for you. Martin from Maui asked this: if convicted, can the defendant receive a pardon from the president and walk free of all the charges? And if so, how soon after sentencing could the president pardon the defendant?
Oh, hello there, Martin. He doesn't have to wait for a sentencing at all. He can decide right this very moment, because these are federal charges, that he wants to take out that pen that he's been using for pardons quite a bit lately. I don't know what the going rate for one is right now in the United States, but whatever that rate is, Diddy's got a lot of money. So it's possible before the end of this trial. We don't know if it's going to happen, but I think when the president was asked, the fact that he didn't say, no, I'm going to wait to see what the jury does, is an indication that it could happen.
We'll see. I heard the shade about the money aspect of it. Preemptive pardons, as you articulate, though, are something that even President Biden also engaged in critically, many thought. Seth, this is from Judy in California, and here is her question. Why was Diddy not charged with drugs and weapons in his hotel room when he was arrested?
Well, I think that was because they were basically incorporated into the predicate acts for the RICO action. You have the evidence that's laying out the foundation for the corrupt business enterprise. So you're talking about arson, kidnapping, coercion, and all of those pieces, and guns, prostitution. So I think those are incorporated into the overall texture of the case in terms of the predicate acts that make up the RICO. And those pieces of evidence have always been very persuasive. So keep in mind, and this really points to an interesting element, when those search warrants were executed and even when they went to arrest Diddy, they found, and the FBI agent testified to this, they found cash, lubricants, drugs,
light machines.
Yeah, it was pretty incriminating. So since you have those pieces, those are going into the predicate act foundations that the prosecution is putting forth in their case here.
Well, we'll see if those are part of the pattern of the so-called freak-offs as we're talking about in this. Ben, Lauren from New York asks, why didn't the defense question Cassie about her financial situation? Was the defense concerned that probing into her finances might be too risky?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think that's part of it. It also goes back to the old adage, don't ask a question on cross-examination to which you don't know the answer. They may not know the answer, so they stayed away from it.
And she's not required to hand over her data. It's the government who has to hand over their evidence only.
Exactly right.
Monique, here's a question from you. Avery from Scottsdale asks, what is the difference between domestic violence and sex trafficking?
So there's a big difference. Sex trafficking involves intimate partner or actual sex in traveling across state lines for those purposes. Domestic violence can be emotional abuse. It is physical abuse. It can be holding against one's will. It all involves an intimate partner type violence, but not necessarily sex. And what we're seeing in this case is that we are hearing a lot of evidence about one thing, domestic violence, that perhaps some years ago could have been charged against this defendant, but is now not able to be because of the expiration of the statute of limitations. And there's sex trafficking, and I'm not really certain, I hear my colleagues, but I'm not really certain at this point whether the people who were trafficked are actually part of the scheme that the prosecution is trying to prove. That's something that's going to remain to be seen over time.
You're all so sharp. Thank you so much. Much more.